I don't think security strategy is very hard. I think that the tactics can be very hard, and get complicated. And they're always evolving and changing because your business is evolving and changing, and the adversary is evolving and changing. But the strategy hasn't changed for 20 years.
Welcome to Trust Versus, a podcast powered by HITRUST, a leader in cybersecurity assurance. I'm Jeremy Huval, Innovation Officer with HITRUST.
And I'm Robert Booker, Strategy Officer of HITRUST. Jeremy, as we started our episode today, we thought about it a lot as looking at the challenge of how organizations of all sizes, from the largest to the smallest, need to consider the management of cybersecurity and how to mitigate the risk of a cybersecurity event. Seems like the attackers we see today are discriminating less and less. It's not just the big companies that are being attacked, or maybe sometimes the small companies get caught in the cybersecurity crossfire in this cyber war when their suppliers or companies they buy technology from are impacted, and they're the companies that are actually the ones dealing with the outage or dealing with the fact their technology is not operating for a period of time. It's really a challenge for companies of all sizes.
Yeah, and today's podcast episode focuses on the question of what constitutes good enough cybersecurity for those smaller, less mature organizations, and really how that question is a strategy consideration first and foremost, as opposed to just something that the IT team has to tackle. So what do even the smaller organizations prioritize given the limited resources and staff they have? They want to keep their name out of the paper too. And how do we better understand everyone's expectation of sort of what is good enough and what do we absolutely must implement in order to just avoid the low-hanging fruit of attacks?
Yeah, we face this problem, for years in the industries we serve here at HITRUST. The industry systems like healthcare are made up of these largest to the smallest organizations. And in the case of healthcare, many of the small entities focused on that strategy of delivering great healthcare to a community they serve, being available for the patients that walk in their doors and making sure they're ready to provide the care that those patients needed. We thought about this problem quite a bit. In fact, Jeremy, we built an approach on assurance for what we describe as the essentials, cyber essentials, a list of the most important cyber hygiene considerations that are super important in keeping a company safe.
Yeah, we realized that in the HITRUST assessment and certification world, forever, it was just one big assessment. It's a great big mountain to climb. And we were sort of expecting very, very robust cybersecurity expectations for even the smallest startup companies that might not have the budget or the resources to implement such a robust set of controls. And so fast forward a few years, now we have a number of assessments, sort of small, interim, and rigorous, or essentials, interim, and rigorous, that really help tailor the cybersecurity expectations to the size of the company and to the complexity of the company, trying to get the assessment done and potentially get that certification. And you mentioned hygiene. We sort of viewed it as, look, if I wash my hands, I'm going to use a certain temperature of water, maybe. More likely, I'll just turn on the faucet. I'll very likely use soap all the time. But whenever the surgeon or the doctor washes their hands before a procedure, totally different. Their procedures, like temperature, right kind of soap. And so we focused on that former, like what is the expectation that all companies need to do as they wash their hands, so to speak, as they maintain their cyber hygiene.
Yeah, and today's guest has actually worked on this cybersecurity problem from the largest company to small companies and has a significant level of expertise in coaching and leading not only security, but security aligned with the strategy of a company for startups. He has a kind of a unique perspective on the problem and thinks of it ultimately as a strategy problem, which is kind of a great way to approach this, probably for any organization, but especially for smaller organizations such as startups who are probably laser focused on their company strategy, making sure they build a good company, a solid and a well-performing company, a company that's ready to grow in the market and meet the needs of the business they're getting into. And it's not only the strategy, but the marketing of that strategy to the company and to the people the company serves to help educate and inspire the organization to focus on those important problems.
That's right. And it was an interesting conversation. Let's get into it. Jason, why don't we start off? Tell us a bit about yourself and about what you do.
Perfect. Happy to be here. Jason Clark. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Cyera, focused on transforming data security, which I believe is the number one least mature domain in all of security and needs to be transformed. Before that, I've done nothing but cybersecurity my entire life. Since 17, joined the Army, did security, then became a CISO very young in my 20s for very large companies, banks and New York Times and Emerson Electric, and got my degree as an executive MBA in strategy, marketing, and then became a strategy officer for very successful cybersecurity companies, and then got into VC as an investor as well. Right, so kind of a combination of spent my whole life being a CISO / helping advise CISOs, then helping advise CEOs of startups, very successful startups, and then VCs.
I'm thinking, Jason, about your background. An Army background, so a bit of a self-started background in the industry. Then you went to school and you picked marketing and strategy. And I really think about the role that security leaders have in educating and potentially inspiring and guiding the companies they work with. I mean, how does that marketing and strategy background shape and inform and help you in your role as a security leader, a person that's actually been coaching and helping people look at a company's security program?
So I think a lot of times people think it's like weird that I am, run security and I run marketing and I run strategy and, probably a few other things. And I always say, look, to do strategy really, really good, to guide a company, because the truth is like the difference of a good strategy is the difference of a company being worth 100 million or 100 billion or 1 billion versus being worth 10 billion or 20 billion. It is to guide yourself to the right problems to solve. And so step one to me is I wake up every single day saying, my job is to understand the problem and the pain better than anybody in the industry. That's what I feel. So you have to really know the problem and be defending against the adversaries. And then you convert that then drives your, as a cybersecurity company, that drives your strategy to those pains, right? Like we know there's a problem, there's a gap. Let's build tech and let's build it better. And let's build the UI so it's easier and more automated.
I appreciate that. And I think that's true not just for marketing and strategy officers in cybersecurity companies, but leaders in all companies. Know the problem, know how your customers are seeing it. But it's especially important in companies heavily dependent on IT, because cybersecurity is a risk for all companies, just about. Maybe not the lawn guy, but almost all companies. So I could see it being globally applicable, not just for your role in your cybersecurity company and VCs that you're part of. So let's talk more about the strategy that executive leadership should have coming into cybersecurity, and maybe under the context of smaller organizations, potentially startups, or potentially organizations that just don't have any full-time in-house skill set for cybersecurity, no CISO, for example. How should that kind of organization think about, what do I need to do for security? What do I need to do to keep my name off the paper?
I don't think security strategy is very hard. I think that the tactics can be very hard. And get complicated, and they're always evolving and changing because your business is evolving and changing, and the adversary is evolving and changing. But the strategy hasn't changed for 20 years, and so I'm going to break that down. So step one is, it's like Sun Tzu Art of War: know thyself, right? And generally, majority of what you're protecting is your data. Right? We call it cybersecurity now, but I still this is information security. It's information security. Like that's what we're protecting. There's certainly an aspect of outages and resilience, and depending on the industry, right? Airlines, manufacturing, but for the most part, bad guys are after your data. and the insiders are generally after data. And so step one, know your data, where it is, how important it is, how sensitive it is, and what the risks to that data is. That's step one. Step two, minimize the attack surface. Step three, complicate unauthorized access to that data. Step four, rapidly detect and respond and contain incidents. Step five, align to the business, right? To the business priorities. Step six, last step, maximize operational excellence. You do those steps in that order. You create the projects and the tactics and the resources to execute to that. You don't overcomplicate it and you focus on the basics. You have a successful security program. The biggest issue I see is that know your data and its importance. So example, if I want to minimize attack surface, well, what's the bad guy trying to get? And if I don't know everywhere my data is and where it's in clear text, credentials or whatever, or where there are less controls to that data, how can I possibly just go minimize attack surface? How can I rapidly detect and respond and contain incidents if I don't have those controls, let's use DLP, is not informed of where my data is and how important that data is, the value of that data, and the consequences for that data getting out. We built all these controls in place without them being well informed. And so I think that makes the rest of our strategy.
If I think about know thyself, knowing where your data resides is tough because so much of our data is flowing outside of our walls now with dependence on third parties. But it's also tough to even know your endpoints and your assets. So part of, I think, number one is endpoint, server, cloud presence, SaaS, inventory, everything, including the data. And so every one of those is tough in its own right. Asset management's tough. Ghost, rogue, IT is tough to detect and all that stuff, let alone understanding where your data's flowing through. So what's the trick? Is there a silver bullet there, or is this the lunch pail work of data governance that there is no magic button for?
It's all your assets that have access to data. So at some point, there's some type of authentication that has to happen to that data to get access to that data, hopefully, right? And so at that point of control, you should know whether it's an external person or an unmanaged device, or what you should know more. There should be, a requirement of learning of the access to the data. So you want to know about the data as it's at rest, and you want to know about the data as it's being accessed and used, and you want to know about the data as it's moving. Those three things. So you can, use data discovery technologies to get it at rest. You then want to understand the use, and you grab that from looking at proxies and the logs of whatever provider, SaaS apps, et cetera. But at some point, it should be a requirement that there's a log that somebody accessed and that data. And what did they come from? And were they authenticated into the degree you wanted, right? And then third, what did they do with that data? Did they move it somewhere, or were they trying to move it somewhere that's less secure? Or it doesn't matter whether it's more secure or less, they moved the data. Those three things should be together. There should be a brain over all of your data risk. Nothing like right now, we focus so much on threat and try to make it with our SOC people don't have to alt tab as much, but yet it's all about data. And so to me, it is very, very doable to bring it all together. Where is my data? How is it being used? What are they coming from? How are they authenticated? Do I have the correct controls? Were they MFA'd? And what did they do with that data? Did they move it? Absolutely accomplishable. And the most sophisticated programs are doing this. They're doing it in a hard way, but that's part of my mission is to help the world make this significantly easier, kind of having a data brain over all of your assets and access.
I think about making that inherent in the culture of a company. I think, we see companies very complex, very large, where, this would seem to be a very significant and a challenging problem. But perhaps if we think of it as something we establish, from the beginning of a company's life, you actually think about building this awareness and this thinking about where is your information and your data and the challenges and the need to actually understand that. It would seem to be getting that started the right way is a big accelerator to the future. You laid out 6 steps that are kind of foundational. I think the 5th one you mentioned was aligning with the business strategy.
I ask CISOs, all right, what's the purpose of every company in the world? Like, name one, tell me one sentence. What's the purpose of your company? And I have a 1-sentence answer for that. Acquire, retain profitable customers, right? Acquire, retain profitable customers. Your security program, you have to ask yourself, are you helping the company acquire new customers? That's step 1. And by the way, the more you're helping the company acquire customers, the more you get paid. The more everybody gets paid. The closer you are to acquiring, the more you get paid in any company. And then retention of customers is a really big deal. Security plays generally people are like, oh, I'm not really helping acquire customers. Well, trust, obviously, right? There are aspects of how you're enabling the business to enter new businesses to acquire customers. And we end up in that conversation and how you do that faster, enter new markets, M&A, et cetera. The, retention part is really important because that's the trust. If you get compromised, what would you lose? I got hired as a CISO for New York Times because they owned 38 companies at the time. I got hired. This is in 2008. Indeed, Monster.com, Discovery, Ask Jeeves, About.com, but they also owned the Boston Globe. Boston Globe got had an incident, let's just say. 10% of their customers canceled within 30 days. That's a significant retention issue, right? And I was hired to resolve that. And so, security, it's obviously a big deal, retention of customers. And then, helping the business be profitable, right? And so to the left, acquire, to the right, profitable, anything, retain and acquire, pay the most. I think that security teams need to not put controls in where we are creating too much friction on the business. And we should be talking to all the executives. And I think that, there's a lot to say around security teams being enablers of aligning to the business priorities. But I always say, what are the 5 things? Like, there's a focus 5. What are the 5 things your CEO says that everybody in the company needs to be working towards? And if you're not doing these 5 things, you're not working for the company, right? You'd be surprised how many people answer me, I don't really know what those 5 things are. Like, that should be ingrained in every employee, but definitely the cybersecurity team should know what the top initiatives of the company is, right? What's mission critical, and how are we helping those mission critical things to be accomplished so we can provide less friction and we can put the right controls and risks to protect those things, depending on what they are. I want to enter China. We want to open up in China. Like, that's big. That's a lot of controls I need to put in place if we're going to go all of a sudden open up in China. But you also don't want to say no, right? And so, the brakes on the car analogy that we've talked about for definitely at least 15 years. I always say, yeah, but what's changed is that this car, it's like with AI, especially digital transformation and cloud, it's not just like this car. It's not just you're the brakes on the car. Your business, it's a Formula One race car now. It's got a whole new engine. It's like you need new everything, new shocks, new airbags, new seatbelts, new everything. But you want to not create friction. And so every business is unique. And that's the fun part, is learning your business and bonding, right? I think I tell people, you should be meeting as a CISO, You should be meeting with the top 5, 6 CISO, C-level people in the company at a minimum once a month, ideally more. And if you're not, like, I don't think you're doing a good job. And I also get CISOs where they respond back to me and they say, yeah, my CIO doesn't want me to, he doesn't really want me interfacing with this C-level and this C-level and this C-level. I say, great, that's a massive problem. You either, you need to leave. Like, it's just not the right job for you. They either don't have confidence in you or they're insecure. Or you shouldn't report to that CIO. You should move out of the CIO, make that move. And people always ask me, well, should it report to the CIO or not? And that's, again, big depends. The depends is, are they insecure? Because I do believe that security and IT go very, very hand in hand. It's a chief information officer, not the chief infrastructure officer. But there's a lot of CIOs that are very insecure and they don't want the CISO engaging to the level they are. And that's a disaster, right? But summary, you have to be talking to them, working with them, helping them accomplish their goals, know what their focus 5 is. And if you don't know that, I don't know how you're aligned to the business.
It seems that's the answer to your number 6, Jason, which is operational excellence. I mean, that really is what the business is delivering. And so aligning to that outcome is going to make sure that your security program is strategically focused on where the business needs to go. Do I have that right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I wouldn't say they necessarily go hand in hand, because there are times in a business where efficiency doesn't matter. You're a fast-growing business, right? And it's less about operational excellence. And now, again, I'm using operational excellence from an efficiency standpoint. Operational excellence matters a lot when it comes to the ability and how fast we're, detecting, responding, containing incidents, right? Like, we want to be extremely efficient at the speed and accuracy we do that. But, I'd say there are plenty of times in companies' journeys where it's just, go, worry about being efficient later.
Let's talk about how measurement and reporting fits and overlays all of these. I imagine there's not one of these characteristics that wouldn't benefit from some sort of measurement periodically or continuous. Can you talk about the criticality of measurement and reporting to satisfy internal stakeholders, yourself as a CISO, the other executives you work with?
You have to be measuring, obviously, clearly if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done, right? Like, it creates the pressure on the teams to be reporting and talking about what's been accomplished and how the risk is changing. I mean, I don't know how you're doing your job if you're not measuring quantitatively and qualitatively the progress that you're making around risk reduction in any domain. And so that's right. I think that's just foundational. It's fundamental. But not focused on reporting the wrong things, because somebody could say, oh, I have 500,000 vulnerabilities and now I have 400,000 vulnerabilities, right? Like, because we patched a bunch like that. That doesn't really, we could go on and on about that topic by itself, but we got to be measuring the right things. Now, I hate when security is seen as an insurance policy. And if you're given $20 million, here you go, $20 million, go secure us. And you're not going back monthly, letting them know how you're spending the money and the accomplishments you're making, they're not really going to want to give you a bunch more, right? They're going to just be like, okay, I paid $20 million for insurance and I'm just praying every night that nothing bad happens. Versus if you're communicating to the business what you're doing and the risk reduction that happens from that, and also how you're enabling the business, I've always found that they want to give you more then. They're like, wow, that's what you did with that? Okay, what if I give you $5 more million? Right? I know you're a good steward. I know you're doing good things. I know there's constantly new challenges. The attack surface is getting bigger. I'm confident giving you more. So if you're not selling your program using reporting and measuring, then they won't want to give you more money.
Let's talk about when you actually have to prove that cybersecurity even to set a low bar, that we're doing enough cybersecurity to an external stakeholder. I'm thinking through, it's not always every company has to actually demonstrate with confidence that, yes, we are addressing cybersecurity, but a lot of them do, because a lot of them handle sensitive data and a lot of them have customers that demand it. And also there's transactions that often require it. Or maybe you're getting hired into a company for the first time and you got to figure it out. When it comes to actually proving it with confidence that even good enough cybersecurity is being met, and here's the gaps that we have to focus on, the actual proving it, the reporting of it, the communication of it, are there best practices you would highlight?
Giving your recommendation and saying, look, this is where we're at today, right? Let's call it 1 out of 10, okay? I think it's just like, you just got to make it simple. It's like we overcomplicate it. And to me, it's like, where do you want to be? And this is how much it costs to get there. And this is, and then, and depending on time frame, and have multiple different phases, multiple different plans. And I think in general, everybody kind of wants to be better and to be good. It's just a matter of what's the appetite of change and what's the appetite of financial cost. And I think, you have that simple question. I was at a company where the head of the audit committee was August Bush. And I was explaining kind of the situation. And he said, can you just make it even simpler for me? And I was doing the 1 to 10 thing, 0 to 10 thing. Can an elephant walk in, or can a mouse come in, or can a cockroach come in? That's how simple I want it. Can you communicate that on each of these business units like that to me? And I'm like, sure, right? People want it simple, and it should be a conversation, and it should be a joint decision versus saying, this is what we need to go do. I think it should be collaborative. And now they're bought in. I think that's but again, it's like, okay, let's say we're going to get to a 7. Now, do we do that in 1 year, or do we do that in 3 years? And these are the cost differences. And what I found is that generally they want to do it sooner. They want to bite the bullet and go now, and they want to go faster. And all the CISOs I've advised on strategy with their CEOs, generally they want to go faster unless it's kind of like, okay, well, we're kind of packaging the company up for sale, we're private equity, or various other factors where costs really matter this year. It's like, can you just like make sure we don't get hacked this year? Do the minimum that we don't get hacked this year. You do see that sometimes. But for the most part, people want to, you put it where you present it, they're like, look, let's get as much done as we can get done right now. Let's bite the bullet.
Very, very NIST CSF, sort of understanding what your current state is, identifying your target state against some set of criteria, be it the NIST CSF or whatever, against some known set of criteria. How are we going to close the gap? Current state, desired future state, what time frame, how much you want to invest in it. Makes sense. And measure along the way, because you can't figure out where you're at in the current state, let alone where you want to be if you don't measure along the way. And communicate with transparency, and communicate with the right degree of technical precision as the other person, hearing expects. Are there any other sort of questions or topics that you think are especially important to cover in this kind of conversation?
I think that when you do, especially for any company, C-levels, when you're doing strategy, not just cybersecurity strategy, right? We talked about that a bunch, but as you're doing any strategy, there's all sorts of tools to use. You can, and I think that people just need to they should use these tools. That you can do a strategy map, the red ocean, blue ocean business model canvases, portfolio matrix. There's BCG's come up with, Boston Consulting Group, right, has come up with a bunch of different things, their own matrix. But overall, there's something that's like one of my favorites that I do with, every company where I'm advising them on their business strategy. And it's like, look, in the end, like you're selling a service or a product, right? So I walk people through something, and it's kind of 5 factors of innovation, and say, look, I want to grade yourself 1 to 5 on these 5 things. And the very best possible answer is going to be 25. And the very best solutions in the world, products in the world, the fastest adopted products in the world, grade better than 20, right? So think Apple iPhone, think ChatGPT. They will grade better than 20. And anything that's been fast adopting, that definitely, unless it's grades above 20, I've never seen anything. So first is, what's your relative advantage? What's your differentiation? Is it obvious? Is your advantage against what exists today and the way people are doing today better 1 to 5? How compatible is it with whatever they're doing today, right? There are other things. How easily is it for them to integrate it to their process or to the rest of their other stuff? 1 to 5. How simple or complex is it? Complex is 1, simplicity is 5. How easy is it to use ChatGPT, right? 5, right? iPhone, people pretty much say that's a 5. Remember the story of Steve Jobs, gave it to a kid before they released it, play with this, right? And they intuitive right away. 5, trialability. How easy is your product to try out? 1 to 5. And then the last one, observability. The degree to which the results of what you can do with this thing is observable, that you prove your value. 1 to 5. And I've done this hundreds of times. You'd be shocked at as people score themselves. I'm like, you're in trouble. You're spending so much on go-to-market. You really should be focusing on kind of creating either more differentiation, or making your product simpler, or making it easy to free trial, or making the results be obvious.
So this was a really interesting conversation to me as an innovator and someone who thinks a lot about the strategy of where we're taking the company and the products. The tie of security to strategy of the company and how innovation is done really resonated with me in a way that I really can't articulate it other than to say cybersecurity is a strategy consideration. And we've all known for a long time, the CISO has to be placed as close as possible to the executive leadership of the company to be able to champion those initiatives. But I think that's true for kind of innovation next to the CISO and next to the actual strategy function of the company, because as you build, it's so common a pitfall to let security lag and let performance lead or functionality lead. And that need not be true. What Jason's talking about kind of explains that there's a way to do strategy and innovation and security and even marketing all together in one. It's a pretty unique perspective, given that he does all those hats in a single company and he's done it for so long.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that as well, Jeremy. And, I've mentored a lot of security leaders throughout my career. I've equally been mentored by some really exceptional folks over the years. And the one thing I've learned, and I believe is really true, is that the best security leaders are wonderful at educating, informing, and inspiring others to align with the approach they are seeking. And what I thought was really interesting about Jason's comments was he's really talking about that in a much more formal innovation and strategy dimension. And so actually making that a formal part of the role and being able to promote security as part of the vision and strategy of the organization was really a compelling way to think about it. Bringing the organization with you in your security journey, that's how we ultimately achieve success. And I guess the counterpoint to that is if your philosophy or culture as a leader is you're requiring people to comply, you're sort of using the stick method to inspire people to do what has to be done, probably effective in the short term and in some cases, but it's not going to sustain itself. And it really doesn't help your business partners and colleagues and the people that are walking the journey with you to actually understand that they're walking with you and that you're all in the boat together working on the success of the company. And we've seen that a lot from, some of our most interesting guests with this podcast. And we hear it in these interviews, how people tell stories and they make security relevant and real. And they have a level of humility in talking to their teams and their management and their customers about the problems they have, and that they don't know all the answers, but that they're continually thinking about and revising their strategy and their approach to the problem. Really, really important part of the consideration of how we lead as security people. And I guess ultimately, the thing I heard from Jason that really resonated for me is if you aren't helping the company gain customers and achieve success with those customers, you're probably not part of the success of the company. And to be very direct, if the company doesn't succeed as a company, whether you secure it or not, probably not so important.
Yeah. Well, and when he queued up that comment, he was saying, like, what is the thing that every business has to do? Immediately, I went back to the business classes. Maximize stakeholder value, right? And that's not the answer. The answer was actually onboard and retain high value customers. It's a different way of looking at it. It's a different way of saying, like, what, as a cybersecurity team member, am I doing to help onboard and retain high value customers? It sounds similar, but there's a nuance here that I think can change behavior.
So in wrapping up, security for small companies is consistent with security for any company. And as we heard today, successful leaders break the problem down as a strategy problem. They align the work with the company's overall strategy, and they're a part of supporting the company's success. And that's really a large part of what we're about, is how do we help organizations ensure that their security systems are mature and that their systems are prepared to help those companies support in keeping the company safe, secure, and ready to operate. So we thank you for your listening. You know the drill. Don't forget to subscribe, rate this podcast on Apple, wherever you listen. Really helps us know you're out there.
Thanks, everyone. Till next time.